Ron Roel.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of 45 Forward, where our mission is to help you, our listeners, from Los Angeles to Long Island, make your second half of life even better than the first. Many aging experts become focused on the field of gerontology when they become, well, older. Not so with Carly Roman. Carly's interest was first piqued as a high school student on Long Island when she founded a local chapter of Glamour Gals, a national group that provides free makeup and manicures, in addition to social connection for older adults. Through her undergraduate and graduate education, culminating with a PhD at the USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, Carly founded two more local chapters of Glamour Gals, and along the way deepened her compassion for seniors into a passion for developing pragmatic programs that benefit older adults and those who support them. In today's episode, Carly, who is currently the innovation manager at the Motion Picture and Television Fund in Southern California, will talk about her core philosophy of positive psychology, shedding light on the positive aspects of aging, and generativity, the feeling of meaningfully contributing to another person's well-being, as well as yourself. In her current position, she focuses on strategies to provide health and wellness, social services, and programs for working and retired members of the entertainment industry. More broadly, she is committed to bridging the gap between research and practice to ensure that older adults have opportunities to feel valued and stay socially connected through intergenerational programs. Drawing from her varied experiences, Carly will talk about her vision for an age integrative rather than an age segregated society. How do we change our age silos to create enriching experiences for all ages? How do we shift resources to deal with the reality of people living longer, reconciling the desire for independence while still being safe? And how do we paint a more realistic picture of the aging process? Not that age doesn't matter, but it does. But people should be valued first for their achievement so that we no longer find ourselves saying, well, that's really amazing for someone their age. So now let's meet our guest, Dr. Carly Roman. Carly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So as I mentioned in the opening, it's nice that, I think one of the issues is in the field of gerontology, of course, there aren't enough people who are really pursuing this field, even as society, inevitably and relentlessly becomes older. That's just a fact demographically. So why don't you walk us through again? I mentioned in the introduction a little bit about your background, but tell us a little bit more about, again, your experience with Glamour Gals, what really got you interested in some of those experiences.
Sure. So when I was a high school student in Long Island, I was asked by a friend to start a chapter of a nonprofit called Glamour Gals, which, was about going to local senior homes to give free makeovers and manicures. I had never stepped foot in a senior home myself. And to be honest, makeovers and manicures were not exactly in my wheelhouse, but I thought this would be a nice way to give back to my community and have a leadership position so that when I applied for college one day, I could say, here's one of the clubs that I helped start. Glamour Gals ended up giving so much more to me than I ever imagined. And I really became good friends with a lot of the residents. I found that being in those assisted living facilities was my happy place. And there was so much joy in bringing this young, youthful energy into the home when a lot of people didn't get to see their younger family members or just were only surrounded by people their own age.
Right. Yeah. And what I like about it is the fact that you stayed with it. It wasn't just something to put on your resume for college. You started other chapters as well, each step along the way.
Exactly. And I think Glamour Gals ended up becoming integrated into every part of my life. So if I were driving my neighbor home from school, I'd stop by the local assisted living facility to say hi to my friends and make it an activity that wasn't just for the Glamour Gals, but also for my friends. And then I'd bring my family. And so it became this really interesting thing in my life that I got to share with others. And it really was all about social connection with people we may not have otherwise met.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then I brought it into my academic interests. And when it came time to do a science research project, for example, when I was in my senior year of high school, I got interested in a field called positive psychology. And I thought, okay, they have all of these exercises where you can practice feeling meaningful and purposeful, and maybe you're reflecting on 3 good things that happened to you each day. But they were all tested out with college students. And so I thought maybe the older adults who I work with through Glamour Gals would be interested in this. And that was my first research study where I took a positive psych exercise and brought it to the people who I loved working with.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that the research, and then when you had Penn too, you were involved in the Center on, what was the name of the Center for Positive Psychology? Or
Yeah, the Positive Psychology Center at
yeah,
UPenn.
yeah, yeah. So I think that and others, I think the research is becoming more and more definitive about that. It's not just, well, this is great, isn't it nice? Positivity, it really does have an impact on people's health and longevity as they get older. Isn't that right?
E- Exactly. And this idea of not just, looking at aging as a time of losses and things that could go wrong and how to, address hearing loss or loss of loved ones, but really focusing on the pieces of your life that can still be valued and still have a positive impact. So even just having a more positive attitude toward the aging process has been shown to increase longevity and be associated with other positive outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we're discovering too that as you get older, not only is it not just about aging and declining, but that certain things that actually get richer in your life, that you get more appreciation, understanding of things. You get in some ways a better perspective on things. So there are a lot of positive aspects to aging, not just um, being wiser, but I
Exactly.
think that is part of it. You do get a certain perspective on things that help you live better and be happier, frankly.
Right. And I think there's this feeling of, you're not just going to school to learn something to make a career, but really what brings you emotional satisfaction and what brings meaning and purpose into your life. And how can you strengthen the relationships and the activities that really bring you joy to make the most of those longer years. As you
Right.
said, we're all living longer, and what can we do to kind of face that reality with a more optimistic outlook?
Yeah. Yeah. So this relates to another term that I've heard you use quite a bit called generativity. To explain that a little bit. They're related to positive psychology, but explain how that's related.
Sure. So generativity initially came from this uh, psychologist named Eric Erickson. He looked at the
Hmm.
different developmental stages, and he said that in midlife, you have the choice of either being generative or stagnant.
Hmm.
And you can imagine that this has to do with providing for your children and really setting up the next generation for success, giving back to younger people. But it doesn't stop at 65, like his theory originally suggested. It actually can continue, and it's anything that contributes to the well being of other people. So, whether that is younger individuals in the next generation or just doing something that helps someone else succeed or, feel supported. And so, that was pretty much the experience that I had in Glamour Gals, was working with these older adults and having a new layer of friendship that allowed not just me to feel like I was giving back to them by being a companion and giving free makeovers, but also giving them the chance to share their experiences, give back to my life, and in the end, really give me a purpose in life. And so that's the idea of generativity, and how it doesn't necessarily have to stop in midlife. It really can continue into older age more and more than it used to.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently had a journalist on our show from the New York Times who did this book called Happiness is a Choice We Make. And it was basically his account. John Leland is his name, his account of spending a year with people 85 and older. And it was clear that what you're just saying was true well into those ages. And that's what they kept them vital, was that feeling of generativity, not just, dealing with the malady of the month, and, and,
Exactly.
and really understanding that even it didn't mean that they didn't have obstacles and issues and health problems, but that was part of life, but that maintaining a positive attitude and a feeling of generativity is what kept them going. So I think you're right on about that. Um, so let me just shift a little bit to just talk a bit about the field of gerontology. It's a complex field. There are lots of disciplines to it, not just biology and medicine. So tell us a little bit about, you know, sort of the modern field of gerontology. How was it taught to you? What did you learn, when you were at USC? And how should it be taught?
Sure. So, gerontology, oftentimes, when I mention that's the field of study that I pursue, people have to think for a second, what does gerontology mean? Eventually, they get to the root and they think geriatric, and okay, we're talking about older people. But really, the field that I studied at USC was about the social sciences of aging, looking at aging as a life course issue that happens even before you're born. And so it's not like you turn 65 and all of a sudden you're in old age. No, rather it's something that is influenced by your earlier experiences, and it's
Mhm.
happening, pretty much every second of every day, regardless of what age you are. At the USC school, we focused on a few core subjects, including the biodemography and health of aging. So looking at different trends and how aging has changed over the years, looking at health disparities and different groups of people and how their aging experiences are different, looking at the psychology of aging and the sociology of aging, and finally the policies that are affected by aging, and also how policies affect aging themselves. So that could be things like healthcare, looking at social security, and really taking a very broad multidisciplinary perspective on the aging process. Mine, of course, my research focused a bit more on the sociology and psychology aspects of aging,
Mhm.
and looking at concepts like generativity, and not just what we know about how old age is currently experienced, but what can we do to really improve old age as we continue living longer lives.
Right. And I guess one of the issues too that you've been concerned about is really how to bridge the gap between research and academia and actual practice. So talk about that a little bit. How do you? I think this is one of the things. There's certainly an element of basic research that's important without, an intended goal in sight. You're just trying to learn, find out about things. But then there is the issue of, well, what does this got to do with our policy and our practice? And so how do you translate some of this into evidence-based programs?
Sure. When I did Glamour Gals, I felt like firsthand I was getting all of these lessons about the aging experience, and I could see exactly what intergenerational programs did for older adults and for participants like myself. But then when you get into the actual world of practice and demonstrating the impact of these programs, there are different aspects that you can look at. And I think what's really important is having a measurement that allows you to show that, the programs, maybe it's Glamour Gals, or maybe it's another intergenerational program where older adults volunteer to help younger people learn to read. How can we demonstrate the impact and what happens before and after those types of programs?
Right.
So whether that's an increase in generativity, and understanding really how to measure that concept, and how to show that these types of programs, in a more natural environment, not just in these experimental studies that happen in the academic world, but in real practice, how are they making an impact?
Yeah. Do you have an example of just, perhaps of a program, like how do you measure that impact?
Sure. So one of the programs that I did some research on was called Experience Core.
Okay.
And this is, like I mentioned, older adults go into schools and they volunteer with elementary school students to support their, maybe it's math, reading, general learning skills, and provide kind of that extra hands-on help that many students need. And of course, when you think about that, it might be like, oh, the younger people, they're benefiting. Let's see how their reading improves or their math improves. But it's actually looking at those older adults as well, and how does volunteering contribute to their improved health, whether that's
Hmm.
physical or mental. And so there's a robust study that was done in Baltimore called the Baltimore Experience Core Trial. And this shows that older adults who volunteer really benefit from all of those factors, whether it's, getting up and out to volunteer in person. Physically, that's good for them. Mentally, it can be stimulating. But of course, what I love to focus on is that generativity aspect. And why do programs like this, where volunteering is really a central component, why do they benefit the older adults who participate? And one of those reasons is that they can really internalize the ability to help others and make an impact in this generative way.
Right. Right. Yeah. So let's shift a little bit. We're going to come up to the break shortly, but wanted to start on just, looking at your job in particular as innovation manager. What does that mean? What sort of stuff do you work on as innovation
Sure.
manager?
It's a very cool job title, and I'm very excited to be working at the Motion Picture and Television Fund and really do exactly what I always dreamed of, which was take those skills I learned as a gerontology PhD student, in measuring impact of programs, understanding why programs are beneficial, and demonstrate them in evidence-based ways so that if we're developing a new program for people at MPTF, whether those are residents or people in the community, how can we also measure the success of that program, include the participants' perspective, so they're helping to plan and develop the programs that they will participate in, and really make the case for contributory activities in a way that they, not just do the activity itself, but also contribute to the way that it's being developed. And so that could be a mentorship program or something like an art class, but really taking the perspective of those who are part of the program and making their own way.
Right, right. Now, just remind us, what is the mission of the fund?
Sure. The mission of the fund is to support the entertainment community in living and aging well with dignity and purpose, and to help each other in times of need.
Right, right. Yeah.
And so MPTF actually was started about 100 years ago. It's a nonprofit, and it started as a coin box by Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin and some other people in the entertainment industry who wanted to give people who were in need in the industry a little extra support from those who, were making it.
Right, right. Yeah, I think this is an interesting notion, especially, you find yourself, you're in the entertainment industry. And of course, a lot of the industry is about youth and beauty and, glamour. And not that it still is not, is involved in that, arena, but I think it's more, cognizant of the issues of aging. And this is sort of a reality of people in the industry themselves. So I want to talk more about that, but we're going to come up to a break now. So we're going to take a short break now, folks, but welcome. When we come back, we'll be talking much more with gerontologist Carly Roman. So don't go anywhere. We have a lot more to talk about, gerontology and related subjects. Welcome back, folks. We're talking with Carly Roman, the gerontologist and innovation manager at the Motion Picture and Television Fund in Southern California. Before we continue, I wanted to let you know that you can find out more about Carly on my Roel Resources site, roelresources.com. Just click on the 45 Forward tab. You can also find out more about the Motion Picture and Television Fund by going to their website, which is mptf.com. You can find out much more about their programs, which Carly is talking about right now. So before the break, we were talking about some of the things that you do there. And so give us some examples of some of your initiatives and some of the programs that you've been involved with the fund.
Sure. So I first was introduced to MPTF a few years ago as a graduate student at USC. And we've talked a bit about evidence-based programs. That was one of the reasons I got looped in, was that they were developing an entertainment industry career mentorship program. And they wanted to have a survey done to really understand which older adults might be interested in participating and how might this improve their attitudes toward intergenerational connections. So I came in to help develop and implement that survey. And now that I'm working there officially, I'm happy to say that we're in development of this program, running focus groups with the potential participants and really finding ways for retired industry members and those who are semi-retired to continue giving back to the industry that they know and love so well. So this is not only to benefit those older adults, but also to help usher in a more diverse industry. And that's something that's really important to the fund. And just generally, I think there's a lot more diversity out there. How can we support people who might not have a way into the industry or have that person to lean on and ask questions from?
Right. Yeah, I think that, certainly there's a lot of focus today on ethnic and racial diversity. And I think that one of the issues that's come up is about age. And this is something that we may talk about more about this later, but in terms of the age silos. So this is something that I think one area in especially the entertainment industry, which is, I guess, more youth and beauty focused, but recognizing that, there's youth and beauty at every age or vitality at every age. And I think that, even you can sort of see it creeping into the products themselves, the films and TV. You have older characters, and they're not just about, kind of, comedies about, about aging and all the, how do we deal with all these issues, but just as regular characters. I think that's, an important step, that it's just part of a normalization of age in our depictions of society.
Exactly. And MBTF actually has their own studio that their motto is creativity is ageless. And
Oh,
so
nice.
they develop original content with residents who live on the senior living campus at MPTF, also people in the community and volunteers, where really age is not at all a main focus. It's just about doing the things that they love and what they did previously in the industry, whether that's sound engineering, filming, being an actor, writer, director. There's a whole range of opportunities at MPTF, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah. So there's a residence there that's part of the organization.
Yes. So the nonprofit serves people in the community, but there's also a campus in Woodland Hills that has different levels of care. There's independent living, assisted living, and a skilled nursing facility, which has a
Oh,
memory care unit. So that's where I get to go and work every day. And just like going to the assisted living facility when I was in high school felt like my happy place. I feel like I'm back in my happy place again. I walk around and see residents between activities, and it's really fun for me.
right. Yeah. So it's basically like a continuing care community.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Did not know about the studio. That's a very interesting aspect to it. Yeah. And I guess there's also a magazine, right? An Accessories Council magazine that where you feature people over 80. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is actually it's its own magazine called Accessories Council magazine, and
Hmm.
recently they did a feature with residents who are over 80 on our campus. So they did a whole makeup and hair prep, and then gave people these accessories to show off, and they were featured in their recent issue. So definitely recommend looking that up. It's available on our website, and also if you look for the Accessories Council magazine.
Hmm.
And this was another demonstration of how, age does not mean that you can't still actively participate in these things that bring joy, and feature some of the positive sides of aging as well.
Right. Right. And some of these things are being actually made into movies. I think you mentioned me previously that there's a movie on being mortal. Tell us about
Yes,
that.
this was one of my favorite books. It's about end of life care, and it's about how, there can be a focus on wellness rather than just extending life
Hmm.
by all means. And so I was excited to see that they're making a movie out of this with Aziz Ansari and Bill
Hmm.
Murray.
Wow.
Uh, and I think that this will show a really realistic picture of what aging looks like. I'm hopeful that it will focus on all the different aspects, whether that's caregiving, palliative care, and end of life care. Um, I just think the book did a great job of kind of demonstrating how we got to the place that we are currently in. In the past, if you had a question and you wanted to find out how something was done, maybe you would have gone to the older adult in your family or an elder in your community. And increasingly with the internet and the information that's available, we don't do that as much. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
how can we kind of come back to our roots of interacting with people in those ways?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there, some of the programs that come to mind for me is that, I guess it was a series produced by Michael Douglas on the Kaminsky Method, which, again, it was about, it had comic moments, but it was serious, but it was about, and it did have, some of these moments about, oh, how do you deal with the fact that, okay, as you're an older man, you have to go to urinate a lot, things like that. But there were also lots of other issues that kind of, you know, made it more than just a stereotyping of aging. So I think this is coming to the fore in a good way. So I appreciate seeing these things. So let's talk a little bit more about that, in terms of just breaking down the silo. So, because one of the components of your work really is this intergenerational component with you personally, as well as your research. So, talk a bit more about the importance of intergenerational aspects of aging.
Sure. So I did my dissertation on a theory called age integration.
Hmm.
And this was really looking at two components, which are uh, the actual intergenerational interactions that people have, and the way that society structures people to be able to interact based on different ages or be segregated. And so you can imagine that if you have schools versus work life versus retirement, that tends to separate people by age. But the more you have intergenerational interactions, the more you might be inspired to break down those barriers that are age related. And so I take that into my experience and my personal life. I think because I had that intergenerational program back in high school with Glamour Gals, it really allowed me to think about aging in a different way and think about the ways that we can break down barriers and further increase those intergenerational connections.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that from my perspective, one of the models I use is contrasting what I call the technological model versus the ecological model. And technology is, it's not really, it's in the broad sense of, understanding the use of an approach of specialization towards solving problems, not just computers and machinery, but and that's, that as we become increasingly specialized in our professions and our expertise, that's certainly important. But then I think, the ecological model, which is, I think, based on relationships and recognizing, the society as a system, and the fact that, yes, just like in nature, specialization is important for competitive reasons and for efficiencies in society. I mean, yes, you can see that providing services for older folks in certain facilities, helps direct the resources toward that. But that's not how communities really work. And I think that we're recognizing that, we're, by going back to sort of an ecological model, recognizing this from whatever you want to say, the green movement or the environmental movement, and recognizing that we're all connected. I think that we're kind of seeing that, well, we need to figure out ways of keeping integrated younger and older, because that's the natural form of community and aging.
Exactly. And bringing that back to the research side is, how do we all benefit from that? I mean, on the younger adult side, we have potentially a different view about aging that is more optimistic and maybe even more realistic. That doesn't mean there's no, health issues that happen when you get older, but what can we do to change the narrative and see that there are still opportunities that will improve people's aging experiences themselves if they aren't looking ahead to something and viewing it in a negative light.
Mhm.
And then for the older adults, it is more natural to keep people engaged with members of society, people of all ages. It shouldn't be, you move to a nursing home and that's it. You don't see younger people. So NPTF does a great job with having volunteers of all ages
Mhm.
help to deliver the programs that we have on campus and in the community. And I think that's not just something that benefits the people who receive the services, but also helping others feels good, and it's good for you. And this comes back to that idea of generativity and pro-social behavior. How can we put a little bit more of that back into our daily experiences?
Right. So you've been involved with a number of other programs too that are interesting. So you did some work with Durot, right?
Yes, in New York City. So that was another one that I interned at when I was in college. They are a social services organization to help older adults in New York City age in place and in their homes comfortably. And one of my favorite experiences with Durot was teaching a 96-year-old woman how to use her new smartphone.
Hmm.
And it was just amazing to see how anxious and excited she was to learn. I think it can be very intimidating sometimes, but happy to report that Emily turned 103 about a month ago
Wow.
and was posting her picture of herself with her birthday cake on Facebook. So,
Right.
there's no barrier just because you're older. I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind.
Right. So just explain a little bit more for our audience, and if they might not be familiar with it. The Durot sort of matches younger and older people as friends, right?
Exactly. So there's a range of friendly visiting. There could be meal delivery services. Maybe someone wants to go get their hair cut and they need a volunteer to walk with them a few blocks in New York City. And so um, really any activity you can think of, Durot has a great way to match people up and get the community involved of all different ages in caring for the older members who live there.
Right, right. And what about your Cedars Sinai Intergenerational Virtual Exercise Program?
Sure, this was a fun one that came out of the pandemic. Everyone, of course, was shifting to virtual programming, and we know that exercise can be really important, but how can we motivate people to exercise? And so this program was pairing up younger and older participants to exercise together on a platform called Flex Together. And
Mhm.
like all the programs that I'm really interested in, I was helping to develop a research protocol around it to make sure that we're not just making a program and not understanding the impact that it has. Uh, and this, can be for any age, but really having that accountability and a partner to exercise with makes it more motivational and even more impactful.
Right, right. And then the last thing I wanted to ask about was this introductory gerontology lessons to Hebrew school students in middle school.
Sure, that was someone reached out to the University of Southern California, Leonard
Hmm.
Davis School of Gerontology, where you go for any gerontology needs. And they asked someone to have a day for their Honoring Older Adults program where someone would speak to, um, what gerontology is as a subject. So it was middle school students. They came and got to sit in a college class and get a little taste of what a gerontology lecture would look like. And they paired that with an intergenerational program where they worked with older adults who had memory impairment and helped listen to music with them so that they could kind of spark these memories and pleasant experiences that the older adults had. So it's really fun to get a completely different demographic, even younger than I was used to teaching gerontology to, and get them excited about the field. And they just had such, you know, innocent but impactful questions about the aging process. I think there was, you know, there weren't any barriers to what they asked about. And I think it brought a new perspective to the field.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important things about, younger people having no sense of what it means to be older. What are the issues, and just having an opportunity to engage with older people and kind of disrupt your ideas of aging. I mean, I think when I was, a well, young person, I think most of the time I remember I remember during the holidays, at my parents would have, parties, and they'd have their friends over, and I go like, oh, that's old people, my parents' age, right? And of course, I'm way older now than sure my parents were at that age. So, it does really help to break down the stereotypes and really get a sense of where young people are headed, and also I think it breaks down some stereotypes older people have of young people, as to what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and what they think of them. So I think it's a really valuable process. I think that I've seen some programs where people actually sit down beforehand and write down, what do you think an older person is like, and they give characteristics and descriptions and so forth. And then they kind of exchange and explain explain themselves, and invariably it leads to some real interesting insights. Uh, so I think this is an important aspect of your age integrated approach um, to society. Um, that's what I wanted to get into. In the last segment coming up, I wanted to talk a little bit more about how do we broaden this approach, Carly, to teach, give a more realistic picture about aging overall. I guess for the public in general, I'm sure there are lots of avenues to do this. But I want to talk about what are the different ways we can teach about aging, what are the different dimensions, as you mentioned earlier, not just about decline, sort of realistic notions about what we need to think about as we do get physically frailer. Um, but how do we deal with these, in terms of an educational perspective? I think what I'm actually going to do is hold on to this thought as we think about this. We're going to go into another break, but again, it's going to be a short break. So don't go away, folks. We'll be talking much more in our last segment with Dr. Carly Roman, gerontologist and innovation manager. Welcome back, folks. Once again, I'm talking with gerontologist and innovation manager at the Motion Picture and Television Fund, Carly Roman, who is herself an innovative thinker too. So, Carly, before the break, we were talking about how can we teach and think about aging differently, in a broad sense, because you've talked about dealing with age silos in society. So, what are the things we can do about teaching about age differently and treating it differently?
Sure. I mean, I'm a gerontologist, so of course, age is certainly a factor that is important. But I think at the same time, we are people, and just understanding the core experience of being a person, um, regardless of what age you are, whether that's in terms of relationships. Of course, it changes a bit when you're younger and in midlife and when you're older, but also what are the pieces that are maintained, and that need for social connection, that need to contribute to others lives and your own experience. How can we just distill it to that very human process?
Right, right. And of course, dealing with it will require some shifting of resources as society gets older. And I think one of the important components is technology, which I know you've been involved with as well. So tell us about that a bit.
Definitely. Technology is something that is, stereotypically not for the older adult population. And I think that is, it does a disservice to the older adults if we just say there's, technology that's too complicated. There are some great organizations out there trying to bridge the digital divide and find ways to make technology more accessible to older adults. Uh, Especially during the pandemic, there's so much that technology has become a lifeline for. So one of those organizations is the Older Adults Technology Services. They're affiliated with AARP, and they have another organization called Senior Planet that develops curriculums for teaching technology. And we're at the MPTF, we're lucky to be piloting their curriculums, and we'll be starting in-person technology classes in April, and really going through all of the things that maybe feel daunting to a lot of older adults, whether that's something as basic as what exactly is the internet and how do we connect to it, and going all the way up to, how do we use Photoshop? I mean, things that don't have to be dismissed just because of age, but really, can we find ways, even intergenerationally, to support it by pairing younger and older people to work and learn together?
Right, right. There's a program locally here. I think there's a national component too called Senior Net, where people do have programs for older folks, and I think pair younger folks teaching them as well as volunteers. I think this is a critical component, and I have to say, we focus on older people, but in terms of technology, and I do think we are in a transitional period where, it's there are many of us in the middle ground who are kind of, we're maybe not digital natives the way our sons and daughters are, but we're in the middle ground, and I think we do recognize the importance of using technology as a means of connection. I think this was came on strong in our area, certainly, and every time there's a major natural disaster, right? I mean, what happens is that often seniors, particularly those who happen to be living alone or just in couples, get isolated. So technology is an important tool. They need to be able to know how to use it. And we need to have systems in place where they can. I think another issue here, at least in New York, is the issue of 5G capability. And there are lots of areas of the country where you don't have internet capacity to do Zoom. And that's sort of about that's going to be a norm. I mean, you're going to have that capability. So I think that from a policy perspective, yeah, technology is going to be important in terms of keeping seniors connected, and I think too, in terms of delivery of services, I think certainly some things with respect to telehealth are going to get rolled back. Medicare sort of broaden their services, but I think like a lot of things with the pandemic, that we've created this hybrid society. They're going to remain, and I think, for example, I mean, this happened to me personally. I had a health issue, and I went to a doctor for an initial hands-on exam, but after that, this woman and I had conversations. through telehealth. I mean, I didn't, you don't need to, cart people to doctor's offices. And I think this is something that I think that you've been involved with too, kind of a more of a person-centered approach to dealing with aging, delivering
Exactly.
services to them. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think ageism plays a strong role in this. There's, this internalized technology is not for me if you're older, but that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, I know some older adults like my friend Emily, who's, on Facebook and learned a new skill at age 96. Other people feel like they didn't get those earlier entrances into technology, and so now it's a lost cause. But that really is not the case. There's always time to learn, and it might be daunting. Sometimes, I swipe the wrong way on my phone, and I think the residents don't realize how many times I'm pressing a wrong button before I
Right.
get the right one. And there's just this maybe slight apprehension about pressing buttons and swiping a different way to find your way on an iPhone. But really teaching people not to be so scared to, within reason, of course, there's got to be internet safety as a foundation, but not too scared to learn new skills and figure out the new ways of communicating with people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of it is just really about a commitment to teaching and learning. Anything you do, takes time to really learn. I think our expectations of technology is like, oh, well, you just learn how to do this. It's like, no, it's not obvious. It's not intuitive. You need to learn how to do it. I mean,
Yeah. And
we do. So we're engaged in Zoom calls, but in order to really use it, there's a lot to learn about how to do it effectively and at different levels. So I think we are bridging or transitioning through older people like myself who are, we're seniors, but we don't feel like it. And I think we don't even know what that word means anymore. So
Mhm.
technology is important. Now, before we have a few more minutes, I want to talk about a couple of other things. One of them is the issue of caregiving too, which deals with a lot of your intergenerational um, um, components and interests. It seems to me this is one of these things, one of these areas which is clearly intergenerational and has a lot of issues to really resolve.
Certainly, I don't think I have the solution for caregiving, but I do think it's important that, everyone will be a caregiver or a recipient of care at some
Hmm.
point in their life. And, how can we strengthen the support networks to really make sure that people who end up in a caregiving role, which again, it's most likely going to happen, that they have the resources that they need, that they have support groups that can make sure that the role is not too burdensome, respite caregiving so that maybe a younger person comes in and steps in for a little bit while you get to take care of your own health and well-being needs.
Yeah, and I think that just as we were speaking about technology, you have to teach and learn about these resources. I think the same is true of caregiving, where there are lots of resources out there. I've discovered I am working on a family caregiving guide myself for families, a sort of a pragmatic guide for each phase of caregiving. And I think that one of the issues I've found is that there are actually a lot of resources, number one, but people don't know about them. They don't know about them in time. And I think that there, in these cases, there are other kinds of silos that we deal with, which is government silos, agency silos, private business, sector silos, and these need to intersect to provide kind of an integrated system of care for people. Um, because the person-centered approach really doesn't care where the help comes from. I need help. That's the what you hear. We need help. Where do we find it, and how do we find it in time to avert a crisis? So I think that's an important gerontological challenge that is clearly multi-generational too.
Certainly. And I think this is where those partnerships, whether they're academics, government, nonprofits, community-based organizations, how can we, kind of consolidate those resources or find ways to make sure that someone goes to a primary care appointment and their doctor learns that they're a caregiver, what can they do to point them in the right direction of resources that might help them?
Right, right. And I think that's where, institutions like yours are really important because they're kind of objective, sources that can basically assess the efficacy of different alternatives and options, and then point people in that right direction. So, as an information resource, I think that's really valuable. Um, Before we close, I just want to touch on one other thing that may require a whole other show. But I mean, it's the issue of multi-generational housing, and I know that this is something that you touched on a bit. Probably take another show on that at some point. But how do we deal with this? So, housing care. These are two big issues, that are big challenges for aging populations.
Sure. I mean, there's some really interesting, innovative programs that try to pair people up if they have rooms
Mhm.
available and they're older themselves. Maybe they have someone younger live with them and provide some extra support with getting groceries or getting them to doctor's appointments. There are other models where a senior living facility might have students from local universities live there for free in exchange for volunteering. And so I think there are opportunities to be creative, but also there's a cultural component where certain cultures are predisposed to having many families in the same household. And uh, in those cases, I think a lot of people don't picture themselves as caregivers if they are younger and live with an
Right.
older relative, but they are caregivers in their own way. And so, um, really kind of helping to identify these places where we can support people who don't traditionally think of themselves as caregivers or create innovative partnerships where younger people get the experience of working with older adults, I think is a new frontier. And like you said, definitely could be an entirely new episode to go over some of
Right.
those models.
Right. Yeah, I think this is how we maintain community with different generations. I think this is going to be an interesting problem to have because I think there'll be some really creative solutions that'll come out of this. So I'm looking forward to that. At any rate, well, unfortunately, we've come to the close of our show. I just wanted to thank you, Carly, so much for all your thoughts and inspiration. Terrific conversation. Before I let you go, if people have questions or comments, what's the best way to contact you? Is it through LinkedIn or is it through your email at uh, MPTF, or what's the
Sure.
best way?
You can reach me at carly.roman@mptf.com. I am also on LinkedIn at Carly Roman, and I have to check my Twitter to make sure I give the right handle, but it's Carly J Roman _ on Twitter. So please feel
Okay.
free to reach out to me at any of those.
Okay, great.
And thank you, Ron. This was really a pleasure.
Yeah, great. It was once again a pleasure for me too. So, once again, folks, if to tell your friends if you missed my conversation with Carly Roman today, you still can listen to it as a podcast on voiceamerica.com or just search for the show 45 Forward. You can listen to it as a podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or go to my show, my website, rowellresources.com, and click on the 45 Forward tab. And if you have questions for me or comments about future shows, you can email me at ron.rowell@gmail.com. So be sure to join me next Monday, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, when I'll be talking with Andrea Gould-Marks, a psychologist who will tell us about the art of practicing patience in a time of relentless change and impatience. So, folks, until then, keep moving forward, 45 Forward.